Hi guys, John here, and today I'm gonna do a little update on my hiatus or hiatal, depending on where you're from. It's the same thing, but I think depending on where you're based, it's got a different name, but it's the same thing. Hiatus, hiatal hernia. About a year ago I did a video talking about my experiences. It's on the channel when I first got the diagnosis. There was a lot I didn't know, and there's still a lot I don't know, and I'm still figuring it out. So I thought I'd provide you with an update. It's been about a year and a half since I first got my diagnosis of my hernia, and just update you on how I'm managing my symptoms, what options am I doing and considering still, because there's still some options for me to consider, and what helps. So from my basic understanding, I'm not a doctor in any way, but I've spoken to specialists and I've done a lot of research into this myself. I've got a bit of health anxiety, so as soon as I get anything, I'm like, what is this? I delve deep into it and I'm researching all the time. But my basic understanding of what the hernia does and the issue with it is it allows acid from your stomach to freely pop into your esophagus. I think that's my basic understanding of it, and that's the issue, because the acid from your stomach, if it's constantly going into your esophagus, not only can that cause really bad symptoms for some people, it can also be quite dangerous, and it can cause something called Barrett syndrome, and that's something that I've worried about a lot, I think. Since getting the hiatus hernia, that's my biggest fear, developing Barrett syndrome. It's been really interesting to read and watch videos online of different people and their experiences with a hiatus hernia, and I think it's really helpful to start this conversation, because it can feel really lonely when you first get diagnosed with something. It can feel quite overwhelming, like what is this and how is this going to affect my life? So for me, I always had a feeling that something was wrong with, but I was like vesseling it in other places, and I think that sort of created health anxiety within me. I was like, I feel like something's wrong when I'm eating. I felt I was sick sometimes if I like, you know, especially, there was a specific meal. I remember if I went to TGI Fridays, I don't know what it was, maybe the grease or whatever, but I was always sick. I always, like clockwork, a few hours later. It was always strange, but there were certain foods I would eat. I was always quite gassy. Quite a gassy person. I remember being at university and it was like a running joke with my friends that I was always burping, and food just didn't sit right with me. Like, it wouldn't sit right with me in my belly. I felt something was wrong, and I was lucky that my symptoms did not, I don't know if it's because I was young or because I was so used to the symptoms that I was just sort of getting with my life. It didn't affect my quality of life until it was like 2 o'clock in the morning and I was getting into like the child's pose, yoga pose, to try and make it feel better, because I just thought it was maybe indigestion. So it was weird, because normally if I have a symptom of something I really investigate into it, but with this I was just sort of dismissed it. It's just a bit of acid. So since my diagnosis, which was a year and a half ago now, of the hiatus hernia, there was a scare that I had, and it was last March, and I had my it was November 2019 now, and it was when I had my last endoscopy, gastroscopy, I can't say the word, and I thought my GP told me I have Barrett syndrome. So I went to see the specialist and I was all like scared, I was terrified, because that can obviously lead to esophagus cancer, which is very scary and something that I get anxious about a lot. I think that's been the biggest fear for me, and so I just want to manage. My main priority, as soon as I found out about the hiatus hernia, is I want to manage this so it never develops into Barrett syndrome. I want to manage this and fix it. That's always been my #1 priority, and still is. And because I'm so young as well, it was so weird when I was reading about it on the NHS site. It says mainly it's people over 50 getting it, but then there's so many people who are under 50 who I've seen videos of who've been suffering with this, or people who've been born with hiatus hernia. So I don't think they've quite worked out the history of it yet and how it fully can develop, because it was like smokers and drinkers, and I don't really smoke. I don't smoke. I don't really smoke. I don't smoke at all, and I'm not a big drinker. So yeah, so I just didn't quite fit the criteria. So then I was obviously very panicked when I went to see the consultant when I thought I had Barrett syndrome. Lo and behold, I do not have Barrett syndrome. I was very relieved. It was a mistake. The GP didn't fully read the letter, and the specialist, the consultant, who was called Dr. Hammond, I believe, at the Manchester Royal Infirmary, went through everything with me in great detail, and we talked about my options, and my options were long-term medication or surgery. But as well as that, I've really honed in on lifestyle changes as well, and that has made a big impact on how the hiatus hernia has not affected my life since my diagnosis. But it is worth mentioning that since I have been diagnosed, I have been taking omeprazole, which there's a lot of information that I still don't fully understand about it, and I've spoke to GPs who've told me that it's fine for me to take it for long-term use, but then you can get online and you can read things, and you start to think, am I okay taking medicine for this long? Because I don't think anybody, including myself, wants to take long-term medication for such a long amount of time. So initially I was taking a really high dosage. I was taking 40 milligrams in the morning, 2 tablets, and 2 tablets in the evening. That was when it was really bad. So I had my first endoscopy. I do have a video as well. If you're about to have an endoscopy or a gastroscopy, check it out, because I talk through it all. It's, yeah, quite an experience. And so when I had that, I had scarring on my esophagus. It was quite scary hearing that. So I went in and they said that I have to take this high amount of omeprazole to avoid any acid going in. And I was first diagnosed with it, so I hadn't made any lifestyle changes as well on that time. And then I had my second endoscopy and things had developed and the scarring had gone completely, which was incredible. So I lowered my dosage and I now take 40 milligrams a day, which I still don't want to take. It's still quite high. So I would like to lower that to 20 milligrams or nothing. And I'm slowly coming in with my lifestyle choices, but the big thing in the back of my head is I never want this to develop to Barrett's syndrome. So because of Barrett's esophagus, so because of that, I'm really wary of, I still do have to take the medication despite what lifestyle changes I'm making. The medication I have no issue with at all. I know that some people do have an issue with omeprazole, and that's a real shame. For me, it's stopped all symptoms I've ever had. I've not had barely any acid reflux. I've not had that feeling of that fullness, that feeling that something's wrong. I've not had any of that since starting taking the medicine, but I don't want to become reliant on omeprazole. I really don't. So I am taking lifestyle choices. So one thing mistake that I've been making for a while is my exercise choices. So I do a lot of, during lockdown, I've been doing a lot of yoga, but also a lot of HIIT sessions, which include a lot of core and really harsh core. And I've been doing like loads of sit-ups. And I remember years ago, I used to do this when I was about 18, 19. I was doing this really intense sit-up program, and I would do about 100 sit-ups like every day, like in like a small 5-minute period. And it was a really intense session. No, it was more than 100, it was way more. And I remember that was the peak of when something felt really wrong. So then a few months ago, I started doing sit-ups again, and I started doing core work because I did not know. No one had told me that there was exercises that I shouldn't be doing. I think the consultant just said, keep fit. I was like, okay, great, I will, and just told me some foods to avoid, which I'll get onto a little bit later. But I was doing sit-ups or every day during the first lockdown, which was last year. And I started to get this feeling when I was eating. It felt like I was swallowing, but I could feel the food going down a bit. And of course that sparked huge anxiety in me of what is this? And I got into a dark part of Google, which I want to avoid forever. I eventually came to the conclusion that it's because I'm doing these intense sit-ups again. Because I was like, I've had no symptoms since I've had my diagnosis, so where is this coming from? And I started to get a little bit of acid reflux again. So what I've really been trying to do is look up exercises where I can still keep fit, because that's so important, but I'm not putting pressure on my core, like too much pressure. When I do put pressure on my core, I do get symptoms again. So I'm not sure if anyone else has experienced this before. So there is some exercises that I do. So I try to keep cardio, I go hiking. I used to go swimming pre-COVID a lot, and I really miss swimming. I do yoga still, and I know that yoga incorporates core, but I don't seem to have the same symptoms after it. So I really do want to try and keep fit still, but it's really hard and it's really frustrating that there's exercises that I shouldn't be doing according to medical advice. You know, you shouldn't really do weight work, it says, so, or push-ups, but I still do push-ups. I think it's just finding what works for you. I think for me it was just the intense core. Maybe there was, I don't know, it was just too much for my abdominals to keep track of, to my digestive system to keep hold of with the hiatus hernia. So I've just eliminated too much intensity on all of my workouts, and I've just tried to exercise, keep fit, but in moderation and not putting too much pressure on my core. I'd love to know if anyone else has any other advice for exercise. Please pop that below, because I'd love to know that a bit more. So the same principle for me is applied for food. So everything in moderation. So when I first got my diagnosis, you get this list and it's like cut out caffeine and fizzy drinks, and I did that for a while. And I think I needed to do that because I have my scarring on my esophagus. And I don't really have fizzy drinks that much anymore, maybe like a can or two a month. I don't really have caffeine. I've been trying to keep to decaf, unless literally like I need some caffeine. But I really, for me, luckily, I've been able to not deprive myself of anything. But as long as I'm having everything in moderation and not binge eating, not having, you know, 3 cups of coffee, not, you know, having an entire bottle of Coke, because I know that would affect my GERD. So yeah, I think that's my tip, just everything in moderation, but also go off the list as well. There is a list of things online that you can find of foods to avoid and exercises to avoid. But for me, I found just I need to keep fit, and I don't want to deprive myself of food, of what I enjoy, because I think both of them are going to affect my quality of life, not keeping fit and not enjoying food. So I think you've got to sort of weigh up what can you do in moderation that's not going to affect your symptoms. What can you do there? Another thing I've been debating, and I'm sure a lot of you are debating as well, is surgery. So I'm still in this limbo of, do I want to take long-term medication or do I want to have a surgery? Now, the issue with surgery for hiatus hernia, I'm not a doctor, but all the research tells me that it's most likely not a long-term solution and it's probably gonna come back. And it sounds quite scary thinking about having an operation. I've never had an operation before, and the thought of that gives me huge anxiety. So I'm having a conversation with a specialist. It was supposed to be last year. We had a phone conversation, but he organised a face-to-face conversation, but due to coronavirus, everything's been postponed. So I'm hoping that we're gonna, he sent me a letter recently that we're gonna have a conversation soon about my options. I have a lot of questions, but the main thing that it keeps coming down to is, how safe is it for me to have this hiatus hernia being in my 20s for a long period of time? I'm hopefully going to live a very long life, taking long-term medication, and what are the long-term effects of having a hiatus hernia, and can I manage that myself? And I really believe I can. I believe that through maybe taking a bit more severe lifestyle choices, maybe sticking to a lower dose of omeprazole, I can manage on that. And every GP I've spoken to has told me that that's fine. And, you know, I probably would go for like maybe getting an endoscopy every couple of years just to like check how things are going. I know it sounds excessive, but it just creates so much anxiety within me. I'd like to just know how things are going and know I've got no scarring or nothing's developing. And just monitor it that way, and then I think I would know what's working and what's not. But I still want to consider surgery and to consider that option, because I'd love a quick fix, but I don't know if there is a quick fix for this, and I don't know. I'm quite divided. It's quite hard. So this is where I'm at. If anyone's had the surgery, please comment below your experiences. I'd love to hear that, and if anyone's considering too, I'd love to know that, because this it's really hard to decide. And I think it ultimately comes down to, is it worth it? What is it going to do? If I'm gonna go through all this trauma of surgery, I think it's a 6 weeks recovery period for it to come back in 6 months. And I don't know if that's worth it. So yeah, it's really hard. I think I'm gonna talk a bit more about my specific hernia, because I think it's important to be aware that every single person is going to have a different placement of the hernia. There's different types of hiatal hernia, so I think that's really important to mention. Overall, it's been a year and a half, and I feel lucky because I know that some people haven't had this, but I feel like things are quite under control right now, and I still feel like I've got some options, but I feel like I've managed to not impact my quality of life by managing symptoms with what am I depriving myself of, and sort of trying to manage that balance. And obviously omeprazole helps massively, but even when I take omeprazole and I excessively eat, or I was doing the core work, I could tell them symptoms were coming back. And there is some videos online. I saw one guy who was talking about his sort of like miracle on YouTube, which was incredible, about all the stuff that he does, all the tips, and there's some really helpful tips on YouTube from all the people who've sort of had like miracle stuff. I tried some of them, they didn't really work necessarily for me, but hopefully they will for somebody else. For me, I've just found that I don't realise that I have a hiatus hernia apart from taking that tablet a day, or if I do excessive core work, or if I, you know, neck 3 bottles of Pepsi Max. So generally in my life it doesn't affect me at all, which I'm really grateful for, and it's been a year and a half. And I've got options that I want to weigh up, surgery options, and I want to weigh up where do I go from here? Like, what are the long-term effects of taking omeprazole? What are the long-term effects of having a hiatus hernia? But I think hopefully that I can manage my symptoms and manage long-term. So yeah, I just thought I'd just throw out some of my experiences, some stuff that I found helpful, some stuff that I'm considering, and just, yeah, provide you with a little update on where I am a year and a half in. Here's where I am. I hope this sort of provided you some sort of help, or it was just nice to hear someone else going through a similar thing, possibly. I know that some people get really bad symptoms, or some people can't have omeprazole. I had some messages previously, so they're really struggling. They're really struggling with managing their issue. My general advice would be, firstly, obviously, to contact a medical professional who knows your exact placement, because there's different types of hiatus hernia. My second bit of advice would be, if you've just been diagnosed, I think just literally take the doctor's advice and just take whatever they're telling you to have for now, and then you can because there is lifestyle things that can help. There is, like, that's proven, you know, but I think in the first instance, take the doctor's advice, because I went from a dramatic stage of literally feeling like something was wrong every day when I was eating, to not having any symptoms anymore. And it's a dramatic change. So that came from the doctor's advice, and then now I'm trying to think of the long-term solutions of lifestyle changes or surgery. Yeah, I feel like I've waffled a little bit, but I hope you've enjoyed the video and it's provided you some help with your hiatus hernia or hiatal hernia. I'd love to hear some experience of yours, so feel free to pop it below. Feel free to subscribe as well. I'm going to do some more stuff on around the topic of GERD, hiatus hernia, and health anxiety. I've got a few videos that I've done already on that. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. Bye.